The new blast furnace was Redcar's gain, but it was at the expense of other steelmaking centres across the country.
Glengarnock, Hartlepool, Shotton, Corby, Bilston, Shelton, Ebbowvale, Eastmoors in Cardiff. It seemed every week there was a plant was closing down. Men were getting disillusioned. People were afraid that, well, were we going to be the next one? No doubt about it, during all of this, plant closures, redundancies and cutbacks, we'd fallen behind in the pay scale. And I think everybody then had come to the conclusion, well, enough was enough. And if we got to fight, then now is the time to fight. And that was it.
And then in 1980, less than 2 years after the blast furnace came on stream, there was the first national strike for more than 50 years.
The Conservative government refused to come to BSC's rescue.
The strike is doing you no good, it's doing the government no good, it's doing the country a great deal of harm.
It affected every steelmaking operation in the country. There was even a question mark over the future of the showpiece plant at Redcar.
Even at the Redcar complex, the acknowledged flagship in British Steel's fight for survival, there are grave doubts for the future. The nerve centre of the operation is the blast furnace, the biggest and newest of its kind in Europe. Nobody's quite sure whether it can be kept ticking over successfully during the dispute. Smaller, traditional blast furnaces have been banked up reasonably successfully.
The strike was long and bitter. "We hate Villiers," they chanted. Sir Charles Villiers was chair of BSC at the time. The strike lasted 13 weeks, and it was the beginning of the end. In the space of 3 years, the number of steelworkers in the UK more than halved, from 166,000 to 70,000, and Teesside wasn't exempt.
I remember, like, as a kid, getting the bus home from school, and the buses were full of fellas coming home from British Steel and ICI, and a lot of them were filthy, you know, with haversacks on their shoulders. The streets were full of these guys, and I just remember in the early 80s, they just vanished.
In recent months, British Steel's order book has been dreadful because firms simply aren't buying. Its own forecasts show that from a peak in the mid-1970s, demand for steel here is continuing to fall away and won't be much more than 12 million tonnes for years.
And unemployment was this thing that it was from the 1930s, and it was back, and it was this terrible crisis, you know. Men were signing on in droves, and lots of anxiety in people in my own family as well, you know, and worrying for the future of the kids. Well, that's been a way of life here since then. It's been a way of life for a lot of ordinary working class people who've struggled to sort of get on, you know.
Another 700 or so would be affected by the closure of Redcar on Teesside, which opened less than 3 years ago. Nick Owen reports.
The blast furnace at Redcar cost £400 million.
When it opened in 1979, 26,000 people worked there. Peter Noteyoung was amongst them.
I was a second-year apprentice electrician the day they opened Redcar blast furnace, so I actually seen it tap its first iron when I was there as an apprentice, and I then seen us cast our last slab as well. I went in the day that we were casting the last slab that was made from that iron, and I went in that day as well. And you shouldn't see the start and the finish of an industry in one working lifetime, and that working lifetime's not even finished yet. I've got plenty of years to go. And I've seen the start of the blast furnace and the finish of the blast furnace. And I was there when it opened, and I was there when we cast the last slab. And that's why it's so sad for me. It's been my whole life.
Corus from here is over that way, yeah?
That's a boss plant right in front of us over there. The blast furnace is actually over there. That's the centre plant stack you can see over yonder.
Like Peter Noteyoung, Bob Stainthorpe's working life, family life and social life has been bound up with iron and steel. He's a union man. I meet him outside the gates, where Corus's logo, passionate about steel, rings hollow.
My father and all his brothers all worked in the steel industry all their lives. I've worked in it all of my life. My brother's worked in it all of his life. And now it's really all gone. It's if you look just over there, that's actually called Dormanstown. Towns like that, Grangetown, South Bank, were all built to house the steelworkers who all worked in the steelworks, and the steelworks used to stretch from here, where we are now at Redcar, almost on the mouth of the Tees, all the way down to Middlesbrough. We're all blast furnaces, and like, this was the last of them, and sadly to say it's now mothballed.
So how long have you been working here?
All told, 40 years. I started way back in 1968, I think it was, 68, 67.
As the plant drew nearer to closure, a sort of community started to build up outside the gates.
And I think you know Bob.
I do. Yeah, we do, yeah.
How are you? How are you feeling? All
Getting
right.
better, yeah.
Good stuff.
Linda Robinson, a writer and
Just
another
feels-
Teessider from a family line of steelworkers, was a regular campaigner at the gate with her placards and her poems.
I noticed today how quiet it is. It's really, really quiet. Normally when you're standing here at the main gate, you normally see a train coming over, dragging these big torpedoes, they call them. You might see steam or smoke and clattering noises going on in the background. But it's very quiet today, very ghostly.
And she was there on the last day.
The start of today's mothballing process marks the end of steelmaking on Teesside, once a pioneer of the industry. As several hundred workers and their families rallied outside the gates of the plant.
There were families arriving looking very pale and drawn. You know, young families, children with placards saying, you know, save Dad's job. It was very, very emotional. There was a band played.
The steel band, the protesters and their placards were outside the Corus gates today. They compared it to the strikes of the 1980s.
It was like being at a funeral. As the band played, it seemed to get quieter on the plant. And then you just saw all the trains stop with the torpedoes and some of the men coming over with their overalls on, you know, dirty faces coming straight off the plant, walking down to be part of that last moment when the music was, you know, playing out. And there's one image I'll always carry. As they played the last post, there was a man stood along to my right, and his face was quite grubby, and he stood very upright. And as they played the last post, I didn't see him cry, but there was a white line appeared at the corner of his eye, and it just became greater as it went down his face. You didn't actually see a tear. You just saw a little white line go down the side of his face as he stood very proudly. And that just summed it up for me. The loss of people's work and hope.
It's more than a workplace, a lot more than a workplace. It's sort of like central to the community. The community exists because of the steelworks, and the steelworks exists because of the community. It's a very strange study, actually. It doesn't feel right, it doesn't look right, and it doesn't sound right. It's not. You know, this is the first time I've been back since the last day of production, when we all met outside the gates here. And it's a bit uncomfortable, to be honest. Maybe because there's no clouds of muck hanging above the place, and it's just not. It's not right.
It really is a horrible place to work. It's dirty, it's hot, it's humid, and nobody likes working in the steelworks. What it is, they like the people that they work with, and there's a wonderful camaraderie there.
They're all huge, usually dirty at work because it's a dirty job. They've got a wicked sense of humour, and I mean wicked, but they all have hearts as big as dustbin lids. Nice people. Brilliant people.
Made in Middlesbrough, made in Teesside, is stamped on buildings, bridges and rail tracks across the world, from the Sydney Harbour Bridge to the office blocks of Canary Wharf and the World Trade Centre in New York. The arch over Wembley Stadium is stuffed with Middlesbrough football shirts, left by the steelworkers who made it.
We're very unknown to a lot of people, Teessiders. They either think we're Geordies or they think we're from Yorkshire. We don't actually have an individual identity to other people of the United Kingdom, I don't think. And the fact that we're always having our identity changed by, are we Teesside, are we Cleveland, are we Tees Valley? You never know what to call yourself when people ask you where you're from. But we know where we're from, and we know what we're from, and we're an industrial people. We're made from the steelworks. We started with the ironstone mines. We were the Klondike people. We helped build the world.